Welcome. As you can see, I've been captured. We had a triple purr earlier. We're all busy watching here. Oh. Anyway, on to the topic of this video. The non-apparent, or one of the non-apparent rabbit holes. You've got what most people consider as a rabbit hole, all the conspiracy theories. But what about non-apparent ones? One such example would be family history, or to give it its more correct name, Genie-ology. It's quite a lure. Now, a lot of people, or a certain number of people I would imagine, go into it with the idea that they may be heir to an unclaimed fortune from a long-lost ancestor. Then, of course, well, hopefully most people would do it purely out of curiosity, just looking into their physical family history, as it were. But it's always a case of be careful what you wish for. Imagine if you were to discover that one of your ancestors turned out to be a character like Jack the Ripper, for example, or the Yorkshire Ripper, or some sort of serial killer. That may not be so comfortable for a lot of people to come to terms with, because it often uncovers skeletons in families and such like. But why do I suggest it is a rabbit hole? You've only got to look at the likes of Ancestry.com, Find My Past, 23andMe, and there's probably others. They all make this bold claim, find out your origins. Several years ago, I messaged, I think it was 23andMe, and actually got a reply. And this is across the board for all of these services to do with genealogy, in that they've taken a cross-section of 5,000 people around the world. So it doesn't actually tell you your origin whatsoever. All it will tell you is you have a commonality of blood type with a certain percentage of people in a certain area of the world. So it's very misleading. But it is very much a case of read the small print, the terms and conditions. For example, Ancestry.com, I think it's item 2. And this is the same with all of these services where you submit your DNA. By doing so, you are agreeing to giving them free and unlimited use of your DNA. But what else is it about this thing that is actually a rabbit hole, or shall we say has a more potentially sinister aspect to it? This reality is very much like a filtering system. You could see it in a way as it's trying to identify key people in this reality today that the system wants to locate and identify, and very coercive and very deceptive in the way that they get people to freely submit a swab with their DNA from one of these like cotton buds in the mouth with the saliva. Saliva obviously is your salvation. But consider, the clue is in the word, Genealogy. Another interesting aspect of this, and potentially it would cost you an absolute fortune if you were to do this for every ancestor, only back as far as 1837 when the civil registrations start, that is the birth, marriage and death records, the civil registrations, as opposed to the ecclesiastical registrations that you would find in parish registers. You can, I think it costs in the region of £10. You can send off to a central records office or to a local registrar's office. They will look up the information and send you this A4 size piece of paper and charge you £10, which will give you a name in the case of a birth certificate, names of parents, the name of the informant. It's very careful. It's worth checking all the wording of these things. Now, a birth certificate will be entitled Certificate of Births and Deaths, and it comes with a red outline. The marriage certificate is in green, and the death certificate is in black. And notice the difference between the birth and the death certificate. The birth certificate says Certificate of Births and Deaths, whereas the death certificate says Certificate of Death. But under the rectangular box with the information, in capital letters underlined, it says not to be used as proof of ID. So how would you get, say, a passport or open a bank account without one of these birth certificates? Or let's give it its more accurate name, a legal fiction. Because that is not you, that is just a piece of paper with a legal identity on it. And it is, of course, Crown copyright, so effectively you are partaking in fraud by doing so. Unknowingly, of course, because this is not sort of made public knowledge. But if you want to check this, go to a specialist copyright solicitor and ask them, how do you open a bank account, how do you get a driving license or a passport or anything like that without using one of these certificates. But it is no different than, say, if I was to take a book by someone like Stephen King and cross the name out and then put my own name on it and say I wrote the book. That would be classed as fraud. So there's some things to think about with this. But certainly with ancestry, for example, they very kindly give you all this information, various parish records, and you can submit corrections to them. So not only are you paying for membership, either monthly or annually, for these things, you're also doing the investigation for whatever organisation. Most of these records offices in the UK, for example, they have film strips which were done by the Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormons. What is that really all about? Ideally, what I would suggest, if you want to know anything about who you are, it's like everything else. You look inside yourself. Consider in the present reality, in the avatar you are in now. If you excel at something like music or sports, for example, it would indicate that in a previous incarnation you weren't particularly good at that thing. Likewise, in the present incarnation, say soccer, if you are have no interest or no inclination towards it, it is more likely an indication that it is something that your soul has already been through and mastered. Now, I'm not suggesting that you would be a famous name. I'm going to use the example of music. It may be you were just an accomplished musician and you may have been part of an orchestra, or you may have been a very good street musician or some sort of entertainer. That would be the far better way to do it, by internalizing things rather than looking externally. Because it is a rabbit hole, it is a trap to go down these routes, and it is a very much a lure to go down these paths out of curiosity in all innocence. But it is worth weighing up what you are actually going into and what are you hoping to find, because parish registers in England and Wales didn't start until 1538 at the earliest. Not all parishes commenced those registers in that year. Some were maybe 60 years later, because it was seen with suspicion as a form of a way of taxing people, and a lot of parishes were very reluctant to do so. Notice also the word parish. Do you perish in a parish? What does come out of looking into family history in general, particularly for unmarried mothers, the situation in the 19th century, if a young lady was pregnant, she was cast out by the parish in which she resided and sort of basically thrown over the border into the neighbouring parish. So when that young woman had a child, she would become a burden to the parish that she found herself in. So she would be outcast from where she was living in whichever parish, and then thrown into another one, and probably not very welcome there. Also, imagine if you were in, say, an agricultural labour, which most people were in the 19th century. You injured yourself, maybe you've broken a leg and you can no longer do that work. You would find yourself classed as an inmate in a workhouse. So when people will make this accusation, depending on your outward appearance of your avatar of, say, privileged white society, that would be the first thing I would come back with, would be to explain workhouses, explain where their privileges were. Yes, for the very wealthy, they would be privileged, but what about the ordinary people, the majority of people, that anybody could, through no fault of their own, the introduction of the threshing machine, the revolution in farming with the introduction of mechanization, how many people found themselves with no work? And that's through that a large number of people from England and Wales and Scotland found themselves in places like Canada. They were encouraged to go out there because they were a surplus population, and those that were in positions of power didn't want the burden of all these people that were now longer not required. And of course that comes with a bittersweet aspect to it. Imagine if you are a grandparent and now your grandchild you'll never see because they're thousands of miles away across the ocean, and if you're of that agricultural class, what chance have you of ever seeing your descendants in that era? So it's a case with everything. Look very carefully at what you're getting into. And also, I would say if you really want to find out more about yourself, don't even go down that route. Go down the route of internalization. Consider, what are your interests? What are your skills today? What do you have no interest in? All these things would indicate that you've either mastered something in your previous life experience, and that's why you have no interest in it, or you may be not particularly good at a particular thing for the same reason. That will give you far better answers to find out about yourself. There's a few things to think about here, and rabbit holes, as I've said, are not just the so-called conspiracy theories. Rabbit holes can be anything from that sort of subconscious realization that there's something not right about this reality, and many will, or through trauma or something, many will turn to various addictions, maybe alcohol. Let's just look at the etymology of that. Alcohol, basically. So it's all co-hauled. If, for example, you were stopped by the police, and you have that when you were driving, you would have that breathe into the bag, and then if it goes over a certain measurement, you would be classed as driving under the influence. But influence of what? There's no accident that alcohol is called spirits, and there is actually one called gin, which just brings us back full circle to genealogy, or genealogy might be the more correct term for it. Whilst it is fascinating to look at in the physical aspect of history of the physical body, what really does it benefit you? What are you getting yourself into? What information are you freely submitting, and to whom are you submitting it? Just a few words of caution here that I wanted to share, because it can be very tempting. I've certainly spent, I think it was something in the region of 12 to 15 years, but I adopted the approach. It became very apparent that a lot of these family trees that are submitted are pure fiction. There is no source information of where this information came from, and in the age of the internet, you have a lot of these urban myth family histories and things. So it's always check the sources, but you're only ever going to get to a position of most probable. For example, your great-great-great-grandmother, would you ever be able to find out what her favourite food or her favourite colour is? For every question you get answered with family history as you go back through the generations, opens up at least another 10 questions, and it gets to the point that there is no answer, there is nobody to verify the information. There is scant information the further you go back. The earliest registers will say John Smith was born, and then whatever date, in 1550 or something. Not even the parents' names, but then it will come where the father's name was added, so it would be John Smith, son of John Smith, was born, as another example. But there was no consistency with the spelling of the surname, so the Smith of the son may be spelt S-M-Y-T-H-E, but the spelling of the father's surname may be S-M-I-T-H. It seems no rhyme, no reason to it. Another little interesting thing that's popped into my mind as well is the way that they would express numbers in the early registers. So 1, 2, and 3 would be expressed as I, or I. The number 4 was expressed as I, J. Interesting that there was no sort of real distinction between the I and the J, because this is something that has been pointed to in regard to years. So you'd have a year J743 and all kinds of assumptions and speculations of what that J stands for, but effectively it's just interchangeable between the I and the J as an expression of the number 1. There's a lot more to this topic that I could go into. The irony is that I actually did 15 years, you could say in one way was a complete waste of time because it wasn't even my family. But what I did gain out of it was a methodology of research, of checking sources of information. Always go back to source, and that's right across the board with everything. So there's a few bits of information to ponder there and things to weigh up. Look very carefully at the wording of everything. If you are tempted to take up one of these find your origins tests, be very sure to read that small print. Imagine if you're freely giving away your DNA and it is giving an entity, a company, free and unlimited use of your DNA. You could potentially be set up for a crime that you didn't even commit on its worst perspective, shall we say. But as always, the choice is yours. It's your free will. It's what interests you. That is the key. Weigh things up. Ask yourself, what is it that interests me? What is it that I have greater skills than most people in, or lesser skills than most people in? That will give you a good indication of your incarnations into these physical bodies in this reality. So I'm going to say love to you all, and to you all until the next video, and please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you done any of these tests? Have you found out any information? Have you gained anything of any real benefit from it? Have you learnt anything from it? And so on. Until the next video, ta-ta for now, and love to you all.